For more on this, Adam Hancock joins us now live from Singapore. Great to have you on the programme. A very big day for China. So now that these borders are open, do we expect many Chinese people to travel overseas after so many years of isolation? But now many countries are putting restrictions on China.
Yeah, I'm not sure that we're going to see a huge rush of travellers coming out of China and going abroad for holidays at the moment. And actually, one of the main reasons for this is because it's very difficult still to get back into China. The borders may now be open, but there's very few international flights travelling back into China at the moment. Only a handful of flights going into Beijing and Shanghai today, for example. And those flights that are running are extremely expensive at the moment. Tickets are being snapped up by people who Chinese nationals living overseas who are desperate to get home and see friends and family. And also, as well as you mentioned, those testing requirements in place that have been put in by a number of countries on travellers coming from China, that might put a few people off as well. But when travel does rebound and when people get the confidence to go abroad again, here in Southeast Asia, you would expect to really benefit from that. A number of countries have decided against imposing any measures, any restrictions on travellers coming from China. And we do expect to see here in Singapore, for example, they're very excited. Lots of their luxury hotels and shopping outlets are preparing for a big rush of travellers once people begin to get the confidence and the flights resume with China directly on a daily basis.
And Adam, domestically, of course, this is such a busy time of the year with the Lunar New Year holidays. And just to give our audience an idea, this is, as big or even bigger than Christmas, right? Thanksgiving. So could this lead to more COVID cases, and where exactly is there concern for this?
Yeah, well, Lunar New Year is absolutely huge. Before COVID, it was seen as the largest annual mass migration of people in the world. And obviously, the last few years, people have been staying at home, really, because of the restrictions. But this year, they're expecting passengers to make over 2 billion trips in the next few weeks. And that's a lot of people heading across the country, which means a lot of the virus spreading to all parts of the country. And one of the biggest concerns, actually, is migrant workers who work in big cities like Beijing and Shanghai. They'll be heading home for the holidays, and often they live in poorer, more rural villages where, unfortunately, the healthcare facilities just aren't as good. And the big concern is that they're going to head home, bring the virus with them, and then there's going to be lots of problems. So the government is really targeting that, trying to boost healthcare in the more rural communities and try and implement systems so people who do get sick can be taken to bigger cities where there's better care. And they're also asking people to be careful as well and not visit elderly relatives if they do have any symptoms. So a big test to come for China.
And just a bit more on that personal responsibility. And after 3 years of these huge restrictions, what are people feeling? Are they also, we're looking at images of people wearing masks. What rules are there, if any, at all? And what does that feel like after 3 years?
Well, I think people probably are a little bit confused. They've gone from these incredibly draconian restrictions, and then almost overnight, that's all been dismantled and life has returned to normal. So I think there's a lot of confusion. There's actually been a lot of social media outrage. There was obviously around the time of the protests at the zero COVID measures, but since then, there's actually been a lot of anger at the speed with which some of these restrictions have been released. I know that the social media platform Weibo made an announcement saying they'd taken down a lot of posts that were being critical of the government response to COVID. And I think people are just can't quite understand why for so long they had to live in such a difficult circumstance. And suddenly now the virus is basically allowed to spread unchecked. There's very few restrictions. The border was actually one of the final real restrictions of COVID zero. So I think people are still being cautious. We saw that initially when the restrictions were dropped, the footfall in a lot of the cities really went down. A lot of people, because they just knew they were going to go out and catch it. So I think people are careful. And the fact that we're not seeing loads of people looking to travel abroad yet shows that people are still being cautious. And there was a lot of psychological damage in terms of people are very afraid of the virus due to the propaganda and the statements made by the government. So it's going to take time for people to relax and be less fearful of COVID.
Absolutely. Adam Hancock, thank you so much. Live there from Singapore. I appreciate the updates.